subcommittee will now come to order. We are meeting today to consider H.R. 2668, the Consumer Protection and Recovery Act. Due to COVID-19, today's markup is being held remotely. All members will participate via video conference. As part of our markup, microphones will be set on mute for the purpose of eliminating inadvertent background noise. You will need to unmute your microphone each time that you wish to speak. Additionally, I ask that you use the raise hand feature of the software platform when you wish to be recognized, including to give an opening statement or to offer an amendment. After you are recognized to speak, please use the lower hand feature of the software platform so that I know that you are no longer seeking recognition. During voice votes, you will have to unmute yourself so that we can hear your response. If you would like to request a recorded vote, please do so immediately after you responded to the voice vote. During recorded votes, you will need to unmute yourself to respond to the clerk once your name is called. In response to the clerk, I would ask that instead of just saying aye or no, that you respond with a phrase. For example, Jan Schakowsky from Illinois votes aye. This will provide additional time for voting members to be identified and made visible on the platform. Amendments and motions should be sent to Chloe Rodriguez and Perry Hamilton, and documents for the record to Ed Kosmarski at the email address that has been provided to your staff. All documents will be entered into the record at the conclusion of the markup. So at this point, I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for an opening statement. Today, the subcommittee meets to mark up Vice Chair Cardenas' bill, the Consumer Protection and Recovery Act. This legislation is urgently needed to ensure that the Federal Trade Commission can do what Congress intended for it to do and the American people need us to do, to protect consumers by putting money back into the pockets of the victims of fraud, scams, and other illegal activities. This authority this authority under Section 13B of the Federal Trade Commission has been the FTC's most effective law enforcement tool for the last 40 years, 2 decades. It was successfully used by the FTC to get back almost $62 million for delivery truck drivers in its remarkable settlement with Amazon over the systemic stealing of drivers' tips. That settlement would not have been possible without the threat of the FTC using its 13B authority. Unfortunately, as you know, this authority was stripped from the FTC last month by a decision of the United States Supreme Court. Only criminals and scammers benefit from this decision, while consumers are the losers. We are here today to right that wrong. For decades, the FTC used Section 13B to recover billions of dollars for millions of consumers in a wide variety of cases, including telemarketing fraud, data security and privacy, and anti-competitive pharmaceuticals, practices, scammers, and those who target seniors and veterans, and deceptive business practices. Under Section 13B, companies that commit that committed violations of the FTC Act could not only be forced to stop the bad practices, but also to pay back the ill-gotten gains. None of the millions of dollars that have been returned and billions that have been returned to consumers would have happened without the use of Section 13B. While some will argue that the FTC's other tools, like Section 19, that those can replace it, those are no replacement. Section 19 requires years of process, and by the time the case is concluded, the money is often long gone, leaving the consumers out in the cold. We must provide the FTC the means to quickly make consumers whole when they have been victimized. That is why we are moving forward today with this legislation to give the FTC back its 13B authority. H.R. 2668, the Consumer Protection and Recovery Act, was introduced with the support of every single Democratic member of the subcommittee. But this is not a partisan issue. We have asked for Republicans for their support, for their input before, and hope that we can work together moving forward. And let me be clear, this is not the only reform that I would like to see and make with regarding the FTC's authority. I think there are a number of other things that we ought to be doing, but I understand what losing Section 13B authority has meant for consumers in my state, in your state, in all states, and am willing and able and want to work with my colleagues to move quickly to address this critical need. Vice Chair Cardenas's legislation is an urgent need, and it's an urgent step that consumers need in order for us to protect them. Lawbreakers must pay literally what they owe, and I hope my colleagues will work with us to put consumers first. I yield back my time, and I now recognize Mr. Bilirakis, ranking member of the Subcommittee on Consumer Protection and Commerce, for 5 minutes for an opening statement, and look forward to working closely with you to make this happen today. I yield to Mr. Bilirakis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, and welcome to today's markup. All the members, H.R. 2668 will be marked up today, the Consumer Protection and Recovery Act. I want to say, first of all, that I sincerely do appreciate my colleague, Mr. Cardenas from California, for introducing this particular bill. As I have said before, it identifies a gap in consumer protection where we need to find a solution. I'm hopeful that this can be a legacy item form, a very important item, just like the legacy item we were able to work out last year for Chair Schakowsky on the FTC First Offense Penalty Authority for COVID scams. However, it can be also a legacy if things are done the wrong way, unfortunately. And sadly, I cannot understand why this has become an effort the majority wants to ram through without any bipartisan input. If there's a directive from the Speaker's office, I would hope you resist that pressure, since this will have a lasting impact, past our tenure. So we must be responsible. Just like our shared actions at the end of last year This does not have to be a zero-sum outcome. The true legacy of this committee is getting tough tasks done together. Mr. Cardenas mentioned this at the COVID scams hearing when we highlighted Senator Wicker's legislation, which addresses both the 13B authority being considered today and would enact a national privacy standard that we have been working towards. Madam Chair, earlier this month, we participated together in an event where you called on us to hold bipartisan roundtables and taking on a call to action by industry and consumer groups to enact comprehensive privacy legislation this Congress. I'm very glad to see you're taking this matter seriously, Madam Chair. And this topic today remains an ideal way to accomplish a common purpose with our Senate colleagues. Acting Chair Slaughter herself cited in her testimony, and I quote, that the commission has rallied on, they've relied on Section 13B of the FTC Act to secure billions of dollars in relief for consumers in a wide variety of cases, as you mentioned, Madam Chair, in your opening remarks, including for data security and privacy. As Leader Rogers has said, let's think about the FTC in holistic and comprehensive terms. Very reasonable. We appreciate the work that the FTC has done, but there are also a number of areas where they have handled matters improperly. Our shared priority here is to protect Americans. I also believe we could have a different outcome here if we were allowed to be together in person, whether it's a markup, a hearing, a forum, or a roundtable. Whatever the setting is, it's pretty hard to share an elevator and consider someone an opponent to be beaten. I remember the days not long ago where we had that civility and collaboration where we could share some food from our districts and get to talk to each other and talk with each other about our families, not having our relationships defined by glitchy technology and a virtual clock. Our constituents deserve better from us. Madam Chair, I have expressed my frustration before with this process, and the scheduling of this markup now joins that list. As I'm sure everyone is eager to begin their Memorial Day weekend and recognize our brave heroes who fought for our freedoms. For this is, I hope, you heed, of course, my advice and consider a different path forward for this legislation and avoid a grueling full committee markup. I urge you to work with us to get a bipartisan compromise together before it reaches that point. We may disagree on the outcome here, but I know we all want to protect consumers. A national privacy framework is the way to do that, and it is a shame to let this opportunity slip through our fingers. So with that, Madam Chair, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman, Mr. Bilirakis, and now I recognize Mr. Pallone, Chair of the full committee, for 5 minutes for his opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I do want to comment briefly on what Mr. Bilirakis said about in-person and why we're doing this today. I've had several conversations, one most recently with the ranking member Rogers, and I've made it clear that I'm not prepared to have us go back to in-person committee hearings and markups. Without belaboring the point, because I don't really want to get personal. The problem is that we know that there are many members who are not vaccinated. From a privacy point of view, I don't think I can demand that the Republicans give me a list of who's vaccinated or not, so that therefore the ones that are vaccinated show up in an in-person hearing and the ones that are not do not. The same is true of the staff. I'm still not sure, based on what the attending physician has said or what the scientists have said, that having a room with a lot of members and staff who are not vaccinated is a good thing, or is it something that, you know, those who are vaccinated can't take back home to their children or others who also have not been vaccinated? So at this point, I'm not prepared to go back in person, and it certainly hasn't been. You know, as you know, the Democratic leadership is continuing to have these committee weeks, and so if we have to take advantage of these committee weeks, which are virtual, in order to get things passed. If we just wait till we're back in session and have hearings then, rather than take advantage of the committee weeks, well, we won't get things done. This committee has wide jurisdiction. So for those two reasons, first, we've got to get things done, and secondly, I don't believe that from a health point of view that we can go back in person. We're not going to do that at this time, and certainly not in the foreseeable future. Now, the other thing I wanted to say, though, is that there's no directive here from the Speaker, Mr. Bilirakis. The Speaker's not involved in this. We just feel very strongly as Democrats that the Cardenas legislation is necessary to help the consumer, and that we need to take action, and that this is an emergency. And we have tried to reach out to you and to the Republicans, but we haven't gotten a response really until today, this morning, when we got these amendments. And it's, you know, that's nice that the amendments come this morning, but it would be better if, you know, we had some cooperation. It's not like we haven't reached out, we have. So again, let me just go to say a little bit about the substance rather than just talk about process. But as you know, last month, the Supreme Court made a decision on Section 13B that has undermined, if not eliminated, the FTC's ability to get restitution in fraud cases and other matters currently being investigated by the agency. And as a result, consumers are being left out in the cold and simply do not have to, and I don't think it has to be this way. So, you know, for 2 years, we've been trying to fix this. We've had hearings on it. We reached out, or I should say, Congressman Cardenas reached out to all members of the subcommittee, worked with him to draft legislation. You mentioned the then FTC Chairman Simmons continued to reach out to Democrats and Republicans. So again, I don't even know what else to say. The day has come to do this. Last month's decision turned this worst case scenario into a reality and produced a crisis. And following that decision, we held a hearing on the legislation before us today, and no specific changes to the bill were suggested by the Republicans until this morning. Let's be clear. The bill we're considering is about returning money stolen or otherwise illegally taken away from our constituents. It's about forcing companies that have broken the law to repay the consumers they have harmed or defrauded. And this money that they would get back allows hardworking families to pay rent, feed their kids, make ends meet. It's helped, the 13B has helped thousands of veterans and those who want to go to college. So I don't see, there's no statutory authority can replace what the FTC lost. Other provisions are too weak or take too long. I don't want to delay. And I just want to thank Tony for his leadership on that issue. I urge my colleagues to support the bill to ensure that the FTC is the consumer protection agency that Americans deserve. It's that simple. I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Pallone. I now recognize Ms. Rogers, ranking member of the full committee, for 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Chairman, and to all the members. For me, this is a disheartening day. Our core concern with this legislation has always been about due process and proper analysis. Judging by the majority's process on this legislation, those concerns are well-founded. It was just a month ago, that a legislative hearing was scheduled virtually for this bill. And that remote hearing excluded other FTC commissioners that the Senate Commerce Committee had had just the week before. Our committee didn't hear their valuable insights that could have made this legislation much better, or built trust that we could come together on solutions crafted around sound legal arguments and proper analysis by all the proper experts. This is a broken process, made much worse by the fact that the committee refuses to open to in-person work. Again, the CDC guidance allows for it. Other committees are doing it. And I know that I speak for all of my colleagues when I say the screens keep us divided. and they lead to poor decisions. This is not a way to legislate. It's no way to do the people's work and to plow the hard ground necessary to deliver results. We just had a subcommittee hearing where the chair told us that we would be back in person in 3 weeks. So I ask now, what is the plan? Is the plan to follow the science and reopen energy and commerce? Or is the plan to keep us muted behind screens so that the majority can command and control the debate? In the case of this remote markup, it just doesn't sit right with us. When you're telling us that you're willing to negotiate this legislation by jamming in a virtual markup with no plan to bring us back together. Why it's disheartening. Now I want to address a few items. We worked together last Congress by designing a national privacy standard, and we made great strides. The objective was strongly linked to this matter before us. Senator Wicker has also worked in good faith for a compromise on the important issues before the FTC. The bill's sponsor, Mr. Cardenas, even acknowledged that the Wicker effort at the COVID scams hearing. If the majority is suggesting today that acting chair of the FTC is recommending this, I don't agree. President Biden has not even conferred her status as the chair, not to mention that if the current nominee is confirmed, there is another current commissioner leaving. Why are we marking up this bill with a rush when we don't even know who's in charge? Further, just last week, Leader Bill Aracas and I sent a letter to DOJ asking for substantive answers from the Attorney General by June 1st. In a late Friday night dump, the DOJ answered the inquiry with partial answers earlier than the deadline. Then coincidentally, our phones rang with the news of a markup from the majority. Not too far behind was the FTC, a quote, independent agency, answering some of our questions from the last hearing. We did not get full answers we requested about the email traffic between DOJ and FTC. That's something we can certainly look to review. Let me be very clear. Mr. Armstrong relayed this at the last hearing, and it should be repeated. In all due respect to the acting FTC chair, it is neither her duty nor her request on what the right strategy and outcome is here. This committee must sit down and move the legislation forward together, in person. There's no lack of will to take on the fraudsters, the scammers, the abusers of our personal information. Energy and Commerce has a proud tradition. We celebrate the culture, the history of this committee. We must seize the opportunity to get real FTC efforts and a national privacy standard done. That is the priority here as we watch the GDPR mark a 3rd year anniversary. This committee has a responsibility to do our job on behalf of the American people so that 49 states aren't relying on California to set the rules of the road. Let's open up Energy and Commerce. Let's do our job. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Rogers. I want to invite other members who seek recognition to make an opening statement. Are there any? If so,
Seek recognition, Cardenas.
Mr. Cardenas, you are recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I'd like to thank all the members for being here on this very, very consumer issue that we have the opportunity as legislators to correct. The FTC is our nation's primary consumer protection agency, and it's underfunded and understaffed and doesn't do as much as we all would like it to do. But the Supreme Court has just pulled the rug out from under the FTC's enforcement powers by interpreting the FTC Act to drastically reduce the Commission's authority to put money back into the pockets of hardworking Americans harmed by illegal practices. We cannot sit idly by and leave our constituents without adequate protection. My bill amends Section 13B of the FTC Act to restore the authority that the FTC has used for nearly 40 years to ask a federal court to order violators to return the money to the victims. This authority is an essential consumer protection tool. The FTC has used Section 13B of the FTC Act for decades to return billions and billions of dollars to American consumers who are harmed by illegal practices like COVID-19 scams, government imposter scams, deceptive business scam claims, and so much more. Far too often, the victims of these practices are senior citizens, veterans, small businesses, and the most vulnerable members of our society. I urge my colleagues to remember how often we have demanded that the FTC do more to protect consumers, and ask that you support the Consumer Protection and Recovery Act to restore the authority the FTC used for decades to protect our nation's consumers. I'd also like to take the opportunity as a family member, as a member of Congress, and a person who has a responsibility of acting responsibly to make sure that I do not carry COVID and infect anybody else around in my life, whether it's staff or any family member or friend that I may come in contact with, if we were in fact going to be having meetings in person, committee meetings in person, where we are all required to be present when we have to respect the constitutional rights of other colleagues to our left and to our right, and not have the authority or demand that they tell us whether or not they've been vaccinated. So therefore, I agree with the chairman, Frank Pallone, and also Ms. Chairwoman of the Subcommittee, Jan Szyskowski, that we should continue to meet as we are right now, virtually, for the safety and sake of our staff, of each other, and of the people who work for us, and everybody else who might be in the hallways in our Capitol. So this is the most responsible way in which we can continue to do business. I would love to see all of you in person, both Republican and Democrat, and say hello to you in person. However, your life is more important to me than my feelings of being able to see you and give you a smile in person. So with that, I yield back. You're muted, Jan.
And put it back to where it was.
We can hear you now.
Sorry, I'm here now. I apologize. I thank Mr. Cardenas. I also want to mention that the ranking member said that I said that we would be able to meet after we came back. What I said was I would hope very much that we could, and there certainly is a way, and that is called vaccination. And until then, that people are at risk. So as much as I desire, I think as much as any of you, that we could meet together, that we could have hearings in person, markups in person. Unfortunately, the situation doesn't allow that right now in our view. Let me ask now if there are other members who would like who seek recognition for 3 minutes. Are there any others? Okay, well then that concludes our, unless I'm missing somebody, that concludes our opening statement. Pursuant to committee rules, members' written opening statements shall be made part of the record. Please submit writing opening statements to the email address that we have provided. At this time, we will begin bill consideration. The chair calls up H.R. 2668, the Consumer Protection and Recovery Act. Clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 2668, a bill to amend the Federal Trade Commission Act to affirmatively confirm the authority of the Federal Trade Commission to seek permanent injunctions and other equitable relief for violations of any provision of law enforced by the Commission.
I unfortunately missed the hand of Ms. Rogers, who actually did want to, I think, have another 3 minutes to speak. Is that right? Ms. Rogers? Did you raise your hand?
No, I have a motion
Oh, okay.
after we're ready to go.
Okay. Without objection, the first reading of the bill will be dispensed with. The bill is now considered as read. Without objection, the bill consideration is read for, and for, open to any amendments at this point. And
Madam Chair, I seek to be recognized. Cardenas,
I
time
recognize,
for an amendment.
yes, I recognize Mr. Cardenas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And once again, I'd like to thank all the members for being here today. Thank you, Madam Chair. I greatly appreciate your prioritizing this critical issue for consumers with the hearing last month and today's markup. I'd like to offer an amendment in the nature of a substitute to the bill. This amendment makes important technical changes to the Consumer Protection and Recovery Act that focuses the bill on the matter at hand.
Excuse me, let me just say then, the clerk will report the
Oh, I'm sorry.
amendment, and then I will recognize you to speak on behalf of your amendment for 5 minutes. So the clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 2668 offered by Mr. Cardenas of California. Strike all after the enacting clause.
Without objection, the reading of the amendment will be dispensed with. Mr. Cardenas is recognized. Is there a mistake?
Raise your hand since you had a motion prior to.
Is that what they're saying? Okay. Okay. It is I'm a bit clumsy today. I've been informed that I should recognize Ms. Rogers first, since she said that she had a motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that consideration of HR 2668 be postponed until June 16th, 2021.
The gentlewoman moved that the let's see, where is that? Has made a motion to postpone. Does anybody?
Madam Chair, I would ask, this is
Table.
Congressman Colon, I would move to table the Rogers motion.
The motion to table is in order and is not debatable, a not debatable motion. So the question is, shall the subcommittee table the motion to postpone? All those in favor say aye.
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 Oh, no, sorry.
No.
All those opposed say no.
No,
No.
no.
In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have, and the motion is tabled.
Madam Chair, I would request a recorded vote.
Okay, a recorded vote has been ordered. The question now occurs on the motion to postpone. All those who are in favor shall signify by saying aye. All those opposed, no. All those will signify by saying aye, yes, and all those opposed will signify by saying no. Yes, if you're for postponement, no, if you are not. What is wrong? The clerk shall call the roll.
Mr. Rush. Ms. Castor. Ms. Trahan. Mr. McNerney.
McNerney votes to not postpone. Vote.
Mr. McNerney votes no. Ms. Clark.
No, Mr. McNerney votes aye, right? Is that one in favor of postponing, of tabling? The question is, let me make it clear again. And by the way, Ms. Castor, we couldn't hear you. Okay, so the question is, should we table the motion to postpone? To table is a yes. Those who are for postponing vote no. No, wait, yes. That's correct. On the motion to table, I'm sorry. Here we go.
Point of
Can we start
clarification,
over?
Madam Chair.
Can we start over?
Point of clarification, Madam Chair.
Yes.
Ms. Cardenas. So what we are voting on at the moment is Frank's motion.
The Frank's motion to table
That's what we're voting on.
the motion. That's what we're voting on.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm
Thank you.
sorry. Let's try it again. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Rush,
Rush of Illinois votes yes on the prolonged motion to table.
Mr. Rush votes aye. Ms. Castor,
Castor votes aye.
aye. Ms. Trahan, Ms. Clark,
Ms. Clark of New York votes aye to table the motion.
Ms. Clark votes aye. Mr. Cardenas,
Mr. Cardenas from California votes aye to table the motion.
Mr. Cardenas votes aye. Mrs. Dingle,
Dingle votes aye.
Mrs. Dingle votes aye. Ms. Kelly,
Kelly votes aye. Ms. Kelly from Illinois votes aye to table the motion. And happy
Ms.
birthday,
Kelly.
Jan.
Ms. Kelly votes aye. Mr. Soto,
From Florida votes aye.
Mr. Soto votes aye. Ms. Rice,
Ms. Rice from New York votes aye.
Ms. Rice votes aye. Ms. Craig,
Craig votes aye.
Ms. Craig votes aye. Ms. Fletcher,
Fletcher votes yes.
Ms. Fletcher votes aye. Mr. Pallone,
Pallone votes aye. Pallone
Mr.
votes
Pallone
aye.
votes aye. Mr. Bilirakis, Mr. Upton,
Mr. Upton from Michigan votes no.
Mr. Upton votes no. Mr. Latta,
Latta votes no.
Mr. Latta votes no. Mr. Guthrie,
Guthrie votes no.
Mr. Guthrie votes no. Mr. Bouchon, Mr. Dunn, Ms. Lesko,
At the end of this vote
Happy
series.
birthday to the chair, a day late, and I vote
Ms. Lesko votes no. Mr. Pence,
Pence votes no.
Mr. Pence votes no. Mr. Armstrong,
No.
Mr. Armstrong votes no. Mrs. Rogers,
Mrs. Rogers votes no.
Mrs. Rogers votes no. Chair Schakowsky,
Chair Schakowsky from Illinois votes yes.
Chair Schakowsky votes aye.
Have all members have their votes recorded?
Mine was not recorded.
Who was not recorded?
Marcus was recorded.
Mr. Bilirakis,
Yes. Bilirakis votes no.
Mr. Bilirakis votes no.
John here requested my vote.
John here requests my vote be read back. It was a no.
Mr. Dunn votes no.
Mr. McNerney would like
How
to
is
know how it
Trahan
was recorded.
Trahan is not recorded.
Trahan votes yes.
Ms. Trahan votes yes.
Mr.
Mr.
McNerney would like
McNerney
to
is
know how
not
he was
recorded.
recorded.
Mr. McNerney
P.
is not
McNerney?
recorded.
McNerney, how is McNerney vote recorded?
Mr. McNerney is recorded as no.
Madam Chair, I'd like to change that to a yes.
Okay.
Mr. McNerney votes aye.
Okay. So if are there no other changes or additions, then the clerk will report the tally.
On that vote, Madam Chair, the yeas were 14 and the nays were 9.
Okay. Okay, what comes next? Okay, the vote then is 14 aye and 9 nays. The motion to table is not agreed to.
He's agreed to.
I mean, the motion to table is agreed to. And I understand, Ms. Rogers, that you were wanting to speak to your motion, and that you were cut off. So if you could, you could be recognized now if you wish to.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. And I'll join in saying happy birthday, day late. I hope you had a good day.
Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, I'll just speak to the vote that we just took. Because I think I do get 5 minutes, but I think we all agree, and we all agree that we need to be providing the Federal Trade Commission with the tools necessary to fight fraud and scams. We worked together last Congress to enact my Safe Web Act extension. Thank you for that, Madam Chair. We were able to pass your legislation on the first offense penalty for the FTC on COVID-19 scams. We have a shared goal to protect people from harm. The reason I feel like this should be postponed is because, first of all, it would give us as Republicans and Democrats an opportunity to work together to improve the bill rather than it being rushed through. As I mentioned in my opening statement, this all seemed to come together on Friday night when we got notified, and there hasn't been much discussion since then. And we do have some ideas. It would give us some extra time. Second, as Republicans, we are frustrated with the process. At our April hearing on the bill, all of the FTC commissioners should have appeared. The Republican bills should have been considered, and the FTC and DOJ should have responded with all of the information that we requested. That's why I had made the motion that we postpone the markup until June 16th. It would help resolve some of these concerns. June 16th is the first Wednesday the House is in session after Memorial Day. So all of our members would be in town and able to participate in an in-person markup, safely participate. It seems that given all the activities on Capitol Hill and at the White House, you know, that we are meeting in person. There's many activities on Capitol Hill where we are gathering in person. We have a 2-century long tradition in this committee where we debate, we legislate, we plow the hard ground necessary to get things done. The CDC guidelines would allow for us to meet in person. The Senate has figured it out. They're doing it with social distancing to ensure everyone feels safe and secure. We go to the floor and we vote and we interact with one another. If anyone doesn't feel safe in the committee room, I feel like it could be optional. Energy and Commerce should be leading by example. We often say that we all know, the members of this committee know that this is the best committee on Capitol Hill. We're eager to do the people's work and work together face to face, not through a computer screen and muted. So I just would like to know what the plan is. And is the plan to follow the science and open up the Energy and Commerce Committee? Or is it to keep us muted and behind these screens? We are all duly elected to serve in the greatest experiment in self-governance the world has ever known. I fundamentally believe that we should be doing our work in person. You know, this is great technology, but it's only part of the way there. There's a lot of communication that is beyond what we are able to experience through this computer screen, and I fear that it's further breaking down the communication and the legislative process. I think I just muted myself. Anyway, given that our constituents are returning to their offices, why should we be different? So that is why I asked for the vote. I made the motion, and I give you my commitment that I do want to work. We do want to work together in a bipartisan way to make a difference in people's lives that we have the honor of representing. And I yield back the
The
balance. of my
gentlewoman,
time. Thank you.
would the
Yes.
gentlewoman yield to me a minute?
Sure, sure.
I just want to say
Chairman.
again, I'm not planning on having us go in person in the foreseeable future. I'm not saying it can't happen in another month or two or September. I mean, obviously that is the goal eventually, but I'm just, and I'm trying not to make this, where I, say, okay, which Republicans have been vaccinated, which staff have been vaccinated, because that becomes a privacy issue. So right now, until we know that somehow that that a lot of the people that we suspect based on what the attending physician is giving for autonomous numbers, he doesn't give the names, but he gives us autonomous numbers about how many members are still not vaccinated. And I
Just,
assume that's
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to run out of time. I just want to say the CDC says that if you're vaccinated, you're safe inside.
Yeah,
outside.
I don't agree with that. I think it would be a mistake for us with so many members and probably staff unvaccinated to go back in person. And I'm just going to leave it at that for now. But thank you for the time.
Thank you. I yield back.
Okay, I understand that Mr. Bilirakis had his hand raised for a motion.
Yes, Madam Chair, I move to strike the last word, and I do have a motion at the desk.
You are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I move that the consideration of HR 2668 be postponed indefinitely. And I'd like to speak on my motion, Madam Chair.
For 5
Madam
minutes.
Chair, you were gracious enough to include me in a virtual forum you participated in recently. We both participated with consumer advocacy groups and business trade groups, where there was a call to action to enact comprehensive privacy bill for this Congress. And I really appreciate you including me. As I discussed in my opener, the most important FTC effort we can accomplish is enactment of such privacy legislation, and the FTC itself has even cited this is it's a priority. The FTC has said this, a priority. We know our Senate counterparts are eager to address both privacy and 13B as well, and I can think of no more effective way of meeting those expectations by tackling these issues together, as Senator Wicker proposed last Congress. We all know a lot can change in negotiation, of course, with the Senate, but the key is we get into a negotiation with Senator Cantwell and Senator Wicker to enact landmark legislation together among the four corners. I think that's the best strategy. For that reason, I urge you postpone this markup and schedule a hearing and markup on privacy legislation that also includes a required fix on 13B. While I believe in-person roundtables can help move the process forward, I don't believe they can be a substitute for a regular order and real legislative action for our members. And I'll give the chair an opportunity to respond if she would like.
No, you can use your 5 minutes.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair. I yield back.
And Madam Chair, I would move to table this motion as well.
So Mr. Pallone has a motion to table. That motion does not, is it not debatable?
I think it's
Excuse me?
just parliamentary inquiry. I think, isn't a motion to table, isn't it like 5 minutes each or something?
Motion to table is in order. I'm looking at that the motion to table is in order and is not debatable.
You have to debate it beforehand then?
Liz, I don't know what you were saying.
When you make the motion.
Okay, it was just one paragraph. I just saw it.
Gus, you're on. Okay.
Can we ask the parliamentarian for a parliamentary inquiry? My understanding is that the motion to table is in order. This is in what I was told, and is not debatable. The question is, shall the subcommittee table the motion to postpone indefinitely? And
Okay.
so
Yes.
all of those in, I'm sorry.
Sounds good.
All those in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed, say no.
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 In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. And so,
Madam Chair,
yes,
I ask for a recorded vote, please.
a recorded vote has been ordered. The question now occurs on the motion to postpone. All those in favor shall signal by saying aye.
No, Madam Chair, point of
Yes.
clarification. The last motion that was made was by Pallone, and I think that is what we would be voting on.
That's what I said. Yes.
I'm sorry, I misheard, I guess.
Okay. So the question now occurs on the motion. Okay. Wait, a recorded vote. No, do we have to vote no? No, it doesn't say that. That's not what it says. Read this. Okay, so this is written incorrectly, and it says, and thank you, Mr. Cardenas, a recorded vote has been ordered. The question occurs on the motion to table, the motion to postpone. All those in favor of tabling that motion shall signify by saying aye.
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 And now the recorded vote was requested, and the clerk shall call the roll.
Mr. Rush,
Rush of Illinois votes aye to the prolonged motion to table.
Mr. Rush votes aye. Ms. Castor,
Ms. Castor votes aye.
Ms. Castor votes aye. Ms. Trahan,
Trahan votes aye.
Ms. Trahan votes aye. Mr. McNerney,
Mr. McNerney from California votes aye.
Mr. McNerney votes aye. Ms. Clark,
Ms. Clark from New York votes aye to table.
Ms. Clark votes aye. Mr. Cardenas,
Mr. Cardenas of California votes aye on the Pallone motion.
Mr. Cardenas votes aye. Mrs. Dingle, Ms. Kelly,
Kelly from Illinois votes aye.
Ms. Kelly votes aye. Mr. Soto,
From Florida votes aye.
Mr. Soto votes aye. Ms. Rice,
Rice votes aye.
Ms. Rice votes aye. Ms. Craig,
Craig votes aye.
Ms. Craig votes aye. Ms. Fletcher,
Fletcher votes aye.
Ms. Fletcher votes aye. Mr. Pallone,
Mr. Pallone votes aye.
Mr. Pallone votes aye. Mr. Bilirakis,
Bilirakis votes
No.
no.
Mr. Bilirakis votes no. Mr. Upton,
Upton votes no.
Mr. Upton votes no. Mr. Latta,
Latta votes no.
Mr. Latta votes no. Mr. Guthrie,
Guthrie votes no.
Mr. Guthrie votes no. Mr. Bouchon, Mr. Dunn,
The minute I vote, turn me back on.
Ms. Lesko, Mr. Pence,
Pence votes no.
Ms. Pence votes no. Mr. Armstrong. Mrs. Rogers.
Mrs. Rogers votes no.
Mrs. Rogers votes no.
Armstrong's
Chair
no.
Schakowsky. Mr. Armstrong votes no. Chair Schakowsky.
Schakowsky from Illinois votes aye.
Chair Schakowsky votes aye.
So, let's see, where's that? Have all members responded to the call of the roll? Does any member wish to change his or her vote? Okay, seeing none, the clerk will report the tally.
On that vote, Madam Chair, the yeas were 13 and the nays were 7.
The vote is 13 aye and 7 no. The motion to table is not agreed to. And now I will recognize Mr. Cardenas to offer an amendment in the nature of a substitute. The clerk will report the amendment.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Ms. Cardenas, point of clarification, the announcement you just made on the 13-7 vote, the 13 votes were confirmed
to table.
Motion to table, correct? To table the Bilirakis motion.
Okay, thank you.
Just point of clarification.
Let me say it directly. The vote is 13 to 10, to 13 to 7, and the motion to table is agreed to.
Got it. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Cardenas, or actually the clerk will report your amendment.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 2668 offered by Mr. Cardenas of California. Strike all after the enacting clause and insert the following.
Without objection, the reading of the amendment will be postponed. Mr. Cardenas is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to thank also Ranking Member Bilirakis and all of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle for your willingness to attend this priority, which we're attending to today in this hearing. I'd like to offer an amendment in the nature of a substitute to the bill. This amendment makes important technical changes to the Consumer Protection and Recovery Act that focuses the bill on the matter at hand, restoring the FTC's authority under Section 13B of the Federal Trade Commission Act to obtain equitable monetary relief for victimized consumers. It is vitally important that this that this subcommittee pass this legislation quickly so that the FTC once again can fight for consumers and provide a level playing field for honest businesses by preventing and deterring wrongdoing, as it should do so. I thank you, Madam Chair, and I yield back.
Madam Chair. It's Kathy.
You're muted, Madam Chair.
Okay.
Madam Chair, I move to strike the last word.
The gentlewoman is recognized to strike the last word.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question for council on the markup of H.R. 2688.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
Council, would you identify the specific laws under the jurisdiction of the Federal Trade Commission that the bill would apply to?
The bill would apply to every law that the Federal Trade Commission enforces.
Does the bill apply to Section 5 violations?
Yes,
Does the bill apply to matters within the jurisdiction of the Judiciary Committee, specifically antitrust?
Why is it an order?
yes,
Can you tell us what other consumer protection laws under the FTC's jurisdiction this would apply to?
any law that the FTC has enforcement authority, it may bring enforcement actions under 13B, so it would be all of them.
Okay, so this bill is pretty broad. The commission has enforcement or administrative responsibilities over approximately 70 consumer protection laws. Thank you. I yield back.
Madam Chair.
Madam Chair? Madam Chair?
Yes.
Bill Rackus seeks to be recognized. I have a question for council, Madam Chair.
Yes, the gentleman, I'm sorry, the gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, thank you. Okay, this is regarding, of course, the markup of H.R. 2668. I move to strike the last word. I believe Section 13B ultimately is to help and protect consumers and to deter those from acting in violation of the law. However, I'm concerned that focusing on retroactive action will not deter those from acting in violation of the FTC Act. So I have a question for council. My question is for council is what guardrails are established in the legislation to ensure the FTC prioritizes ongoing violations of laws enforced by the FTC?
As counsel, I can answer any question about what the bill says. Respectfully, Congressman, I'm not sure that the law specifies what the FTC should or should not prioritize.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and I yield back, Madam Chair.
Are there any other members who seek recognition? And recognition. And hold on a second. What comes next? I don't know what I'm supposed to ask. I asked, all right. Who sought recognition? I can't tell you. Oh, we don't vote on that? I feel like it's asking. I still don't understand. Get me somebody.
Madam Chair?
Yeah.
Bill Rackus, again, I seek recognition.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have an amendment at the desk.
No, wait a second.
It's titled Limitations 501.
Madam Chair, you're muted.
And your inquiry was what?
Yes, I have an amendment at the desk, Madam Chair.
Yes, the gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The current statute of limitations outlined in this legislation will allow the FTC.
Does the clerk have the amendment?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Yes, the clerk will read the amendment.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 2668 offered by Mr. Bilirakis of Florida. Page 3, line 23, strike 10 years and insert 5 years.
Without objection, the amendment will be presented as, we'll suspend with the reading of the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate it. The current statute of limitations outlined in this legislation will allow the FTC to seek restitution or disgorgement in violations dating 10 years, but going back 10 years. However, as we learned during the hearing and from responses to our questions for the record, generally, federal statute of limitations are limited to penalties within the previous 5 years. Even Acting Chair Slaughter noted most of the retroactive cases have been limited to no more than 5 to 7 years. Dr. Howard Beals noted a shorter statute protects against surprises through the assertion of claims long after the conduct, when evidence may be stale or no longer available, and encourages the timely filing of claims by regulatory agencies. I agree we should absolutely be going after these bad actors, but I fear if the FTC fails to take timely action to address ongoing violations, there may be a higher risk of harm that impacts consumers. I truly doubt that this is the result of my colleagues. They don't want to see this. My colleagues don't want to see this. My amendment is straightforward and strikes the right balance between seeking out bad actors and deterring those from committing them in the future. It would allow the FTC to retroactively pursue bad actors no more than 5 years prior to filing a suit. Like I mentioned earlier, it must be practical. Like I mentioned earlier, this has the potential to be a legacy bill for a great colleague of mine. So it is critical that we get this right. I urge all my colleagues to support this amendment, and I yield back. Now, yes, please.
Are there any other members who wish to speak on the amendment? But first, let me ask, does Mr. Cardenas choose to reserve a point of order?
Yes, I choose to reserve a point of order.
Any other people who want to speak on the amendment?
Madam Chair,
Yes?
Representative Soto, if I may be recognized.
Yes. The gentleman is recognized.
I move to strike the last word. First, I want to just explain my support for Rep. Cardenas's bill. We saw during COVID so many consumers that were defrauded. We saw everything from miracle cures like bleach being hawked in Florida to stimulus scams to paycheck protection program scams. And in the midst of all this, we saw several courts strike down what is already well-established authority to seek recoupment of these fraudulent funds by the FTC. So really restoring a key power that the FTC has for many years. I do think we should determine what look back period it should be, whether it's 5 or 10 years or something of that nature. I do think it, and I encourage Representative Cardenas to find at some point as we get forward. But overall, we need to reestablish this to protect consumers. The coronavirus pandemic laid bare how vulnerable our constituents are, particularly during the pandemic, particularly when there are benefits being awarded under the CARES Act and now the American Rescue Plan, without the FTC being on the watch with all the power and tools they have to protect our constituents. So I applaud Representative Cardenas for this great bill, and I yield back.
Will the gentleman yield? This is Cardenas.
To the gentleman from California.
Yeah, yes, thank you very, very much. I appreciate the thoughtfulness of Mr. Bilirakis, my colleague Bilirakis, and his amendment. I'm more than happy to discuss his amendment with him and deliberate that between this subcommittee and the full committee hearing. And I am taking serious the questions and the dialogue that I've been approached with when it comes to what strikes the right balance when it comes to statute. So thank you so much, and thank you for yielding, Soto.
Back.
Will you yield? Go ahead, please, Madam Chair.
Who is asking recognition? I'm
Bill
sorry.
Arakis, but I'll go after you, Madam Chair.
I thank you very much. I just wanted to remind everybody that what we're really talking about here is an urgency on behalf of consumers. That people right now at this moment of being in limbo will not get to be made whole when there are scams against them. You know, we can talk about process, and we can talk about other things that ought to be there in the legislation. But as I said earlier, the most important tool right now of the most important tool right now of the FTC is the 13B, the ability to actually put money back into people's pockets and take it away from those who have basically stolen it from them. And I'm just hoping as we proceed forward that we remember what the essence of this debate is about and what the essence of the legislation that we're considering today. It's simple, it's straightforward, it's one thing to make sure, but a big thing, a really important thing that can make it better for consumers. And so that is why I just wanted to say we can talk about process and all other kinds of legislation that ought to be there, but we have, I think, the opportunity to fill in a gap, to fill in something that has been there for 40 years for consumers, and that it is absolutely an opportunity that we have right now to do that. And so I just want to urge support for Mr. Cardenas's legislation. You know, we had warnings that this was going to happen. We knew that the Supreme Court was going to be taking it up. We tried to move this legislation forward, and today is the day. We can do this. And so I really urge all my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to just put aside all the other things that we could be doing, that we'd like to do, all these other process questions, how we'd like to do it, and support this pro-consumer piece of legislation. And with that, I yield back. Mr. Bilirakis.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I appreciate so much Mr. Cardenas's willingness to work with me on this particular amendment with regard to the statute of limitations. Are you willing to discuss this with me and work with me on this, and obviously in good faith? If you are, Madam Chair, I'm willing to withdraw the amendment.
Yeah, the question was to me, Mr. Bilirakis?
Yes.
Okay, as the author? Yes, I'm more than happy to discuss that with you. There's a lot to be discussed on this. 5 or 10 years, both of them sound straightforward, but I'm more than happy to discuss with you on what the process is with the FTC and the reasons why we will end up with a statute of limitations that is fair and appropriate. So I'm more than happy to discuss that with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
But the gentleman does withdraw his amendment. And
well, Madam Chair, yes. Are you willing to work with me on this particular issue?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Very good. Thank you so much, and I will withdraw my amendment.
And now, are there other members who seek recognition, to seek an amendment? I understand Ms. Castor is wanting to raise the issue. Ms. Castor? No?
Move to strike the last word, Madam Chair.
Oh, okay, go ahead. You recognize.
Well, thank you so much. Colleagues, there are too many scam artists out there and too many dishonest crooks that are preying on our neighbors. You know, this part of the Federal Trade Commission Act was so important because that was one of the tools where when they caught these crooks, they would be able to recover money, the ill-gotten gains from these scam artists. So one of the reasons we're moving quickly is this was a unanimous Supreme Court decision at the end of April. I read it as an invitation for us to get right back and fix the statute. And that's what we heard from Acting Chair Slaughter. You know, I looked up just a quick sampling of scams. Here's one. Last month in Massachusetts, an 81-year-old woman reported a caller that said, "Oh, your grandniece is in trouble. Please mail me $9,000 in cash." They tracked this criminal ring down to a group in Indianapolis, and they had been operating in 10 different cities. Here's another one. Kind-hearted donors in New Jersey and New York were scammed out of tens of millions of dollars. They claimed that they were raising money for homeless veterans, for retired and disabled law enforcement officers, breast cancer survivors. They used this tool to get the money back to the people who had been scammed. In Florida, from July 2018 to today, under this mechanism, about 545,000 Floridians were able to get $81 million back into their pockets. So we've got to move quickly. And I want to thank Congressman Cardenas for doing that and for the committee for moving this quickly. But there is more that we need to do because here's the FTC, our premier consumer protection agency, but it lacks a lot of the basic authorities that really make it effective. And I would like to see the committee work on making sure we go to APA rulemaking and giving the FTC the first offense civil penalty authority. Instead of rulemaking under the APA, which most other agencies use, we heard in testimony that they are under a more burdensome process known as Magnuson-Moss. We heard from Acting Chair Slaughter that means this goes on for years sometimes. So let's modernize the law there. The FTC also lacks the authority to fine companies for unfair and deceptive practices under Section 5. So here's the most important consumer protection agency, and they do not have the ability to penalize those who violate the law. So let's work together to make this consumer protection agency operating in a very fast-paced world. Let's give them the tools they need to truly protect our neighbors across the country. There are too many bad actors out there. So Chair Schakowsky, I was going to offer some amendments today on this, but I think it's so important to move Congressman Cardenas's bill swiftly. Do you agree that we need to work on giving the FTC the additional tools they need to be as effective as possible for our neighbors at home?
Well, absolutely, and I appreciate your bringing up these issues. I agree that the FTC could be more effective with these authorities, bringing it more in line with other federal laws, law enforcement agencies, and certainly for the consumer protection that we need. But today, and I appreciate your understanding and your cooperation with resolving that the most important thing that we do right now is to restore Section 13B, which is in Mr. Cardenas's bill. So I agree that the proposals that you have thought about and talked about deserve serious consideration. And my hope continues to be that we can reach bipartisan consensus on the underlying bill right now, which is something that you championed just now, as well. So I commit certainly to working with you and actually all of the members to even get more input on the proposals that will protect consumers and make them even safer. So yes, I yield. I to you.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair and colleagues. Let's work together to improve the FTC and what they're able to do in protecting our neighbors from these scam artists. But move this bill, very important bill today, swiftly. Thank you so much. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back, and I'm calling to see if there are any other members who seek recognition to offer an amendment to the amendment.
Madam Chair, I move to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized, Mr. Armstrong.
Thank you. And I agree with Rep. Castor, and I think Republicans on this committee have been clear that we agree that the FTC absolutely has to have the tools to protect consumers. However, we must also ensure the FTC does so in a manner that does not negate the enforcement structure Congress has created. So with that, I have a couple questions for council. Are there any provisions in HR 2668 that would ensure the FTC does not base an enforcement action on potential violation that is inconsistent with any guidelines, general statements of policy, or similar guidance unless the acts or practices violate a provision of law enforced by the FTC?
I'm sorry, Congressman. I didn't catch the beginning of your question. Could you please repeat it? I'm sorry.
All right. Are there any provisions in this bill that would ensure that the FTC does not base an enforcement action on a potential violation that is inconsistent with any guidelines, general statements of policy, or similar guidance unless the acts or practices violate a provision of law enforced by the FTC?
The bill does not address guidance issued by the FTC.
Does this legislation provide an opportunity for a defendant to offer evidence in compliance with the law?
Yes.
Does it allow for a defendant to offer as evidence of compliance with the law FTC guidelines, general statements of policy, or similar guidance?
It does not prohibit a defendant from doing that.
Would this legislation allow a defendant to seek legal counsel?
Yes.
Thank you. I yield back, but I have an amendment at the desk as well. I don't know how you want to do this, Madam Chair.
Clerk have the amendment at the desk?
What is the amendment?
The amendments from Armstrong.
Did the clerk find the amendment? No.
What's the name of the amendment? What's it labeled?
Disgorgement.
I have two labeled disgorge. Is it 2003 or econ?
What did you say? The clerk, did you find it? The clerk will read the
Yes, I found
amendment.
it. Yes, Madam Chair, I found it. Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to 2668 by the minority. Page 4, line 10, strike the date of the enactment of this act and insert date.
Cardenas reserves a point of order.
The unanimous consent to postpone the reading of to not read the rest of the amendment.
Cardenas reserves a point of order. Thank you.
She said that the Republicans who filed a name, they didn't file names. So what's the name of the amendment, I guess? Ask for the title of the amendment, is what we really said.
Did we settle
the 2003 amendment?
Mr. Armstrong, did we settle what the amendment was and it was noticed?
Sure, the 2003 amendment.
Yes, that's what.
And Mr. Cardenas has a point of order. The
Yes.
amendment was accepted as we accepted it. Now, Mr. Armstrong, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Thank you, Madam Chair. This amendment would delay the applicability of the bill until the FTC reinstates the policy statements on monetary equitable remedies in competition cases and applies it to cases in which the FTC seeks monetary equitable remedies under 13B. This policy statement was unanimously adopted in 2003, but eliminated in 2012. As articulated by Professor Beals in the subcommittee's recent hearing on 13B authorities, the policy statement provides reasonable guidelines for the use of disgorgement and restitution in competition cases. It concludes that disgorgement and restitution may be useful in competition cases, but only in certain circumstances, particularly when more familiar antitrust remedies like divestiture, conduct remedies, private damages, as well as civil and criminal penalties do not produce desired outcomes. There are 3 main factors. First, a clear violation of the law exists. This is when a defendant could reasonably expect that certain conduct would be found illegal, often based on precedent. This factor sets a deterrent that known unlawful conduct will not be profitable. As Professor Beals explained, this clarity standard ensures adequate deterrence without shielding truthful information that is beneficial to consumers. The second factor is that a reasonable basis exists for calculating remedial payment. This does not require undue exacting precision. Even the 2012 repeal of this policy statement noted that this provision merely restates existing legal standards. Finally, the third factor holds that other civil and criminal remedies would not fully address the violation by eliminating ill-gotten gains. Disgorgement and restitution are to be used as a last resort to ensure a wrongdoer does not profit. As Professor Beals wrote, the FTC's resources should be used to complement, not compete with private remedies. These remedies are not intended to be duplicative of other remedies and should only be deployed when absolutely necessary for equity. I agree with Professor Beals that we should reinstate the substantive limits, including this policy statement. These are reasonable factors that ensure disgorgement and restitution are only applied in circumstances where there is clarity, a quantifiable remedy, and where other remedies have failed to fulfill public policy goals. And with that, I yield back.
Madam Chair, this is Cardenas. I move to strike the last word.
Recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Tying the FTC's and the court's ability to use 13B to a modification in the FTC's competition policy holds consumers hostage to the benefit of companies violating competition laws. There's no question about whether the companies that are forced to provide relief to consumers under Section 13B after the policy change acted illegally. The FTC must prove its case before getting redress. This is the bedrock of 13B. We're only dealing with companies that a court has found to violate the law. I don't understand why we want to let some lawbreakers off the hook. Clearly, the FTC decided nearly 10 years ago that the policy the minority seeks to reinstate was outdated and undermining its ability to get recovery for consumers in competition cases. Since then, the FTC has been returning ill-gotten gains from competition violations to all our constituents. Perpetrators inflicting such damage on commerce and consumers should not be allowed to keep the ill-gotten gains. The victims deserve restitution. Moreover, a change like this goes to the heart of the application of competition law by the FTC. The Judiciary Committee received a sequential referral on the Consumer Protection and Recovery Act. To the extent that changes are made to competition law, the Judiciary Committee should and will have the opportunity to consider and act upon such matters. And that is the way it should be. I urge my colleagues to vote against this amendment that undermines the FTC's authority to get redress for consumers and support the Consumer Protection and Recovery Act. With that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back, and I need to figure out exactly where we are at. I'm waiting for some instructions. Is there anybody else, first of all, that would that has an amendment to offer? Or is there anyone else who wants to speak on this amendment? Hmm? Okay, then I will ask for a voice vote on Mr. Armstrong's amendment. All of those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All of those opposed, all of those opposed, say no.
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 Madam Chair, a roll call.
Okay, the clerk will, a roll call has been requested, and the clerk will call the roll. Madam Clerk?
Your audio.
Apologies. Mr. Rush.
Rush votes no.
Mr. Rush votes no. Ms. Castor.
Ms. Castor votes no.
Ms. Castor votes no. Ms. Trahan.
Mr. Hand votes no.
Ms. Trahan votes no. Mr. McNerney.
McNerney of California votes no.
Mr. McNerney votes no. Ms. Clark. Mr. Cardenas.
Cardenas from California votes no.
Mr. Cardenas votes no. Mrs. Dingle.
Dingle votes no.
Mrs. Dingle votes no. Ms. Kelly.
Kelly of Illinois votes no.
Ms. Kelly votes no. Mr. Soto.
Of Florida votes no.
Mr. Soto votes no. Ms. Rice.
Rice votes no.
Ms. Rice votes no. Ms. Craig.
Craig votes no.
Ms. Craig votes no. Ms. Fletcher.
Fletcher votes no.
Ms. Fletcher votes no. Mr. Pallone.
Pallone votes no.
Mr. Pallone votes no. Mr. Bilirakis.
Bilirakis votes yes.
Mr. Bilirakis votes aye. Mr. Upton.
Upton votes aye.
Mr. Upton votes aye. Mr. Latta.
Latta votes aye.
Mr. Latta votes aye. Mr. Guthrie.
Guthrie votes aye.
Mr. Guthrie votes aye. Mr. Bouchon. Mr. Dunn. Ms. Lesko. Mr. Pence.
Pence votes aye.
Mr. Pence votes aye. Mr. Armstrong.
Yes.
Mr. Armstrong votes aye. Mrs. Rogers.
Mrs. Rogers votes aye.
Mrs. Rogers votes aye. Chair Schakowsky.
Ms. Schakowsky of Illinois votes no.
Chair Schakowsky votes no.
Madam Chairwoman, how am I recorded? This is Congresswoman Yvette Clark.
Ms. Clark, you are not recorded.
Ms. Clark of New York votes no.
Ms. Clark votes no.
Are there any others who want to either change their vote or to be recorded? If not, the clerk. The clerk will report the tally.
On that vote, Madam Chair, the yeas were 7 and the nays were 14.
The ayes were 7 and the nays were 14. That the motion is not agreed to, and the motion is not passed. Okay. Are there any other members who seek recognition to offer an amendment to the amendment in the name of a substitute?
Madam Chair, Lattice seeks recognition.
Mr. Lattice is recognized.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair. I have a question for council.
Mr. Lattice recognized. Council.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Council, in the bill, what is there to ensure that the economic analysis is incorporated and applied in authorities going forward?
What economic analysis are you referring to, Congressman?
Well, under the Federal Trade Commission, there's the Bureau of Economics, and wanted to check to see, is there anything in the bill that applies with economic analysis?
The bill does not address that.
Thank you. Madam Chair, Lattice seeks recognition. Offer an amendment.
Is it who?
Mr. Lattice.
Mr. Lattice, you have an amendment at the desk?
I have an amendment at the desk, Madam Chair, labeled Disgorge Econ 01.
The clerk will read the amendment.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to HR 2668 offered by Mr. Latta of Ohio. Page 4, line 10, strike.
Without objection, the reading of the amendment will be dispensed with. Mr. Latta is recognized for 5 minutes for his amendment.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Cardenas reserves a point of order. Sorry, Madam Chair. Sorry, Len. Cardenas reserves a point of order.
Mr. Cardenas, hold the point of order.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Latta?
Housed within the Federal Trade Commission rests the Bureau of Economics, whose mission is to evaluate the economic impact of its actions by providing economic analysis for competition and consumer protection, investigations, and rulemaking, and analyzing the economic impact of government regulations on businesses and consumers. Unfortunately, it seems that this critical piece to the FTC decisions, is often disregarded or overlooked. The Bureau of Economics has published a detailed analysis of how it calculates remedies. It also frequently weighs in on settlements and cases with calculations of the likely injury and proper redress. During the April 27th legislative hearing, Republicans urged for increased transparency and economic analysis to ensure the FTC does not create unintended consequences. Unfortunately, it does not seem these concerns were taken seriously. As we examine reforms to the FTC, we must ensure that the FTC is considering the potential impact of its actions on the market and consumers. My amendment would do just that. It would require the FTC to conduct an economic analysis prior to seeking disgorgement in any case filed by the FTC. I urge all my colleagues to support the amendment and bring this much needed safeguards to the legislation. Madam Chair, thank you very much, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Does anyone seek recognition to?
This Cardenas, I move to strike the last word.
Mr. Cardenas is recognized.
Thank you very much. I'd like to start off by saying I enjoy working with all of my colleagues, but I really do enjoy working with you, Mr. Latta, and thank you for your consideration and taking the time to make your motion. I'm glad that our markup today has brought my friends in the minority to the table to discuss the Consumer Protection and Recovery Act and the needed fix to the FTC's authority to get relief for consumers. The new amendments filed shows me that we are not very far apart on this issue, and that there is a path forward to work together. I have some questions about this amendment, which provides the FTC cannot obtain disgorgement of ill-gotten gains without conducting an economic analysis. For example, what kind of economic analysis is required? Is it Is it a cost-benefit analysis? Is it an analysis of the amount of consumer harm or the amount of unjust profit the defendant earned through its illicit acts? Is it an analysis of the economic harm caused by the defendant's law violations? I believe the FTC already does thorough analysis in their investigations of potential violations, so that by the time they file suit or reach a settlement, those issues are worked out. So I'm not sure this amendment is necessary. I'm also not sure this amendment protects consumers or potential defendants. I think this idea needs more vetting. How will economic analysis be interpreted by the FTC? Are there unintended consequences of this economic analysis? Without those answers, I'm going to vote against this amendment today, but I commit to working with my colleague to get the answers and try to work out an agreement on this idea before this bill moves to the full committee markup. Restoring its authority to return money to consumers is critical to keeping the FTC as the world's leading consumer protection agency. I really hope we can work this out together. But until then, if we're forced to have a vote on this amendment, I urge a no vote.
Does the gentleman yield back?
I yield back.
Is there anyone else who seeks recognition on this amendment? If not, Mr. Cardenas, do you withdraw your
Yes, I withdraw my point of
reservation? Then we will move to a vote on.
Madam Chair, I ask for a recorded vote.
Okay. The clerk then will call the roll on Mr. Lada's amendment.
Mr. Rush.
Rush of Illinois votes no.
Mr. Rush votes no. Ms. Castor.
Ms. Castor votes no.
Ms. Castor votes no. Ms. Trahan. Mr. McNerney.
McNerney of California votes no.
Mr. McNerney votes no. Ms. Clark.
Ms. Clark of New York votes no.
Ms. Clark votes no. Mr. Cardenas.
Mr. Cardenas of California votes no.
Mr. Cardenas votes no. Mrs. Dingle.
Dingle votes no.
Mrs. Dingle votes no. Ms. Kelly.
Miss Kelly of Illinois votes no.
Ms. Kelly votes no. Mr. Soto.
Soto of Florida votes no.
Mr. Soto votes no. Ms. Rice.
Rice votes no.
Ms. Rice votes no. Ms. Craig.
Craig votes no.
Ms. Craig votes no. Ms. Fletcher.
Fletcher votes no.
Ms. Fletcher votes no. Mr. Pallone.
Pallone votes no.
Mr. Pallone votes no. Mr. Bilirakis.
Bilirakis votes yes.
Mr. Bilirakis votes aye. Mr. Upton.
Upton votes aye.
Mr. Upton votes aye. Mr. Latta.
Latta votes aye.
Mr. Latta votes aye. Mr. Guthrie.
Guthrie votes aye.
Mr. Guthrie votes aye. Mr. Bouchon. Mr. Dunn. Ms. Lesko.
Lesko votes aye.
Ms. Lesko votes aye. Mr. Pence.
Pence votes aye.
Mr. Pence votes aye. Mr. Armstrong.
Yes.
Mr. Armstrong votes aye. Mrs. Rogers.
Mrs. Rogers votes aye.
Mrs. Rogers votes aye. Chair Schakowsky.
Schakowsky votes no.
Chair Schakowsky votes no.
Have all members responded to the call of the roll?
How is Trahan recorded?
Ms. Trahan is not recorded.
Trahan votes no.
Ms. Trahan votes no.
Does any member wish to change his or her vote? Okay. If not, the clerk will report the tally.
On that vote, Madam Chair, the ayes were 8 and the nays were 14.
The ayes were 8 and the nays were 14. The amendment is not agreed to. Are there any further amendments in the nature of a substitute?
Madam Chair, it's Upton. Can I strike the last word?
You may. Mr. Upton is recognized.
And I have a brief question for the council, looking really for a yes or no answer. Question is, the legislation and Supreme Court decision, the legislation before us is going to apply to the ongoing violations of the law. Is that correct? And would it apply retroactively?
Section 2B of the bill states that the amendments made in the bill apply with respect to any action or proceeding that is pending on or commenced after the date the bill is enacted. So if your question is whether it applies to pending matters, the answer is yes.
Thank you. Yield back.
Are there any other amendments that members wish to offer? Do any members seek recognition for an amendment? Okay, then no.
Yes, Madam Chair. I have an amendment at the desk. Bilirakis.
Mr. Bilirakis, as a member, does the clerk have that amendment?
It's titled FTC Reports, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair, I have the amendment.
The clerk will read the amendment.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to 2668 offered by Mr. Bilirakis of Florida. At the end of the bill, insert the following.
So without objection, the reading of the amendment will be dispensed with. And the gentleman is recognized to speak on his amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate it. My amendment is straightforward. It would require the FTC to publish and submit an annual plan to Congress on December 1st of each year. This plan would include a description of FTC's policy priorities, projected rulemaking, plans to develop guidelines, plans to restructure the FTC or establish or alter working groups, planned projects or initiatives, any projected dates and timelines associated with these initiatives, and any changes to aforementioned activities. The amendment would also require the FTC to publish and submit to Congress an annual report on the FTC's enforcement actions involving allegations of elder abuse. This is an issue I know every single member on this subcommittee supports. By providing greater information about elder fraud, it will help to better examine the FTC's focus and priorities around the vulnerable population and, of course, and ensure the elderly are adequately protected. So very important. I think it is incredibly important, as I said, considering the legislation this subcommittee passed to protect seniors from COVID-19 scams. This amendment merely requires the FTC to engage in a process that allows for more public feedback and input, which will assist the agency in better protecting consumers by addressing issues that matter to them. Madam Chair, I think you know where this trend is going. Again, Republicans have brought some really good ideas to increase transparency, checks and balances, and other reforms to prevent unintended consequences from any action taken by the FTC. But unfortunately, these ideas are being ignored. Leader Rogers and I have shared our desire to make this a bipartisan process, and I remain hopeful you and the sponsor of this legislation, Mr. Cardenas, will take us up on this. Again, Madam Chair, I think this is a great opportunity. We have a vehicle here to address a lot of these issues, including the privacy issue. In closing, while I plan on withdrawing my amendment, and I do so, I would ask that you work with me on this particular language. And I yield back the balance of my time, but I will withdraw the amendment, Madam Chair.
I thank the gentleman for withdrawing the amendment to the amendment of the nature of a substitute. Now let me ask if there are other amendments.
Madam Chair, just point of personal privilege, I look forward to working with you, Mr. Bilirakis, as I mentioned before, and thank you for your thoughtfulness and work through the chair and with the chair on that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yes,
Are there
Madam
any-
Chair, I have another amendment at the desk.
Okay, Madam Clerk, do you have the amendment?
Madam Chair, it's titled SURE, S-U-R-E.
This was an amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Correct.
Do you have it, Madam?
Madam Chair, I have the amendment.
Okay, if you would read the amendment.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 2668 offered by Mr. Bilirakis of Florida. At the end of the bill, insert the following.
Okay, without objection, the reading of the amendment will be dispensed with. And
Cardenas reserves a point of order.
I recognize now Mr. Bilirakis to speak on his amendment to the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Under current law, the FTC must show that there is a substantial injury to consumers, which is not outweighed by countervailing benefits to consumers or competition, and which is not reasonably avoidable by consumers themselves. And I quoted that, so that's not my language. This amendment changes nothing about the FTC's ability to consider public policy concerns without basing entire cases on such concerns. Again, that's current law. The amendment draws from the FTC's current policy statement to clarify that in determining whether a substantial injury has occurred, the FTC must consider the following: whether the act or practice results in monetary harm, whether the act or practice results in unwarranted health or safety risk, and whether the act or practice results only in emotional or other more subjective harm. In addition, the section would codify the portion of the policy statement that reinforces that an act or practice must be net injurious in order to trigger enforcement by the Commission. This provides additional assurance that the Commission is not inadvertently suppressing innovative products and services that on the whole result in a benefit to consumers or competition. It was argued at the legislative hearing that requiring an act or practice to be net injurious, again, I'm quoting that particular statement, helps non-injured consumers to the detriment of harmed consumers. The reality is that this is required in current law. This amendment would merely reinforce this concept. Let's not forget that the FTC is a federal cop with a big stick. That stick should be wielded with restraint and must be used only after consideration, again, balancing the equities. I think this is incredibly important, Madam Chair, so it bears repeating. We must ensure checks and balances are included in the FTC's authority, especially when expanding their authority to seek monetary remedies. While I plan on withdrawing this amendment, I encourage my Democratic friends to work with us to ensure the language drafted by Mr. Mullen moves forward in any conversation to reform the FTC. Again, I think this language that was drafted, Mr. Mullen's amendment that I'm doing on his behalf today, is very reasonable. And Madam Chair, I hope that in the next stop, we have an opportunity to, again, offer these amendments, and hopefully they're strongly considered by the majority. But I plan to withdraw, and I will withdraw this particular amendment. Thank you, and I'll yield back, Madam Chair.
I think the gentleman, I like the way you put it, the next step, because this is not the last step, what is happening today. And I just want to assure the ranking member and all of the members on both sides of the aisle that we can work together between now and the the full committee. And let me yield to.
Cardenas withdraws his reservation on the point of order. And also, I agree with you, Madam Chair, looking forward to working with Mr. Bilirakis and all of our colleagues. Thank you.
And so with that, are there any other members who seek recognition to offer an amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute?
Madam Chair, I have an amendment at the desk. It's Bilirakis again. You're probably tired of hearing my voice.
No, never.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
The clerk have the amendment at the desk?
Madam Chair, what is the name of the amendment?
The amendment is titled Time, T-I-M-E.
Madam Chair, I have the amendment.
The clerk will read the amendment.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to 2668 offered by Mr. Bilirakis of Florida. At the end of the bill, insert the following. Section 3.
Without objection, the reading of the amendment will be.
Cardenas reserves a point of order.
Point of order reserved. And Mr. Bilirakis, you are recognized on your amendment to the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I thank you for giving us these assurances that you will work with us before the next stop, and also for the prime sponsor of the amendment. What a good person he is, and I know he's trying to do the right thing. This amendment places a statutory cap of years, 8 years, which is still longer than what we see at the FCC and the CFPB on consent decrees relating to unfair or deceptive acts or practices between the FTC and a would-be defendant, unless the case involved fraud allegations or there is a reason to believe that the defendant is a repeat offender. This amendment also requires the FTC to review any such consent decree 5 years after it is entered into. Most of the Commission's enforcement actions result in settlements, also known as consent decrees, rather than judicial decisions. Madam Chair, because the consent decrees often set strict penalties for prohibited activity, even in areas beyond the scope of the original order, they empower the FTC to engage in quasi-rulemaking, especially if the consent decree covers a major company. Consent decrees should not outlive the purpose for which they were originally entered into, and the FTC should not be allowed to pursue continuously changing policy objectives through them over a 20-year span. Madam Chair, while I plan on withdrawing, and I will withdraw the amendment, I would like to ask you to consider this language drafted by actually Representative Burgess. So I'm offering this on his behalf. So I'd ask you to consider this language moving forward. So Madam Chair, if I can get some assurances with regard to consideration, the actual sponsor of the bill might want to speak on this too.
I am more than happy to do so. I look forward to working with you, the author of the bill, as we move forward to consider whether or not it should be there when we go to when we leave full committee. So yes, I mean, I appreciate the withdrawal of amendment at this time so that we can move it forward with including consideration of ideas that have been presented. Yes.
This is Cardenas, Madam.
Go
This
ahead.
is Cardenas, Chair. I withdraw my reservation, point of order, and then also I do concur with you. I look forward to working with Mr. Bilirakis. Thank you.
Thank you. In that case, I'll withdraw my amendment, Madam Chair. Thank you. And I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for withdrawing and ask again whether or not there are any members who seek recognition to offer an amendment to the substitute.
Madam Chair.
Who's seeking?
Mr. Guthrie, Kentucky.
Mr. Guthrie is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have an amendment at the desk. It's clear 1005.
Does the clerk have that amendment?
I have clear.
Clear, yeah, clear the clear amendment, yes.
Okay. Then yes, Madam Chair, I do have the amendment.
So the clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to
Cardenas reserves a point of order.
to 2668 offered by the minority. At the end of the bill, insert the following.
Without objection, the reading of the amendment will be dispensed with. And, Mr. Guthrie, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate it. And the debate today is extremely important. Remember, we're not restoring FTC authority under Section 13B. We're granting it. The Supreme Court was clear in a unanimous decision that the FTC acted without authority. In authority they can't consume, but only we can grant. And that's a great debate because we need to make sure they have the authority in the proper way. And the Supreme Court found that the FTC, they did find they can seek monetary remedy, but only after following its administrative procedures. It can get an injunction to stop it, to immediately stop harm, but must go through procedures for monetary damages. And the case decided, and some of the others mentioned there are clear deceptions and bad actors, and we want the people to be remedied. But process is important because sometimes the facts aren't so clear in every case. Process is important, and how the FTC decides things are important. And regulated entities need clear and transparent rules on enforcement. And that's gets to my amendment today, which is the CLEAR Act. And there is a lack of clarity and transparency around FTC's interpretation of its broad Section 5 authority. And some advocates have described the Commission's series of consent decrees under its Consumer Protection Authority as common law. But under common law, entities are able to learn from previous cases that have been cleared. Clarifying the FTC's practices, including their legal analysis for closing cases, will improve all stakeholders' insights on the Commission's operations. Transparency to advance consumer protection should be a common goal for all of us in this space. Simply put, my amendment today requires the FTC to report annually on consumer protection investigations and ensure an economic analysis is considered in determining whether or not an act is or practice is unfair. The report must include the number of investigations commenced and closed. For those that have been closed without official agency action, a sufficient description to indicate the legal analysis is required for supporting the decision not to bring forward a case. This enhanced clarity is vital because it would help companies take innovative and ultimately consumer welfare enhancing risks that otherwise could be relaxed in an uncertain legal environment. Madam Chair, as my colleagues have said, this should not be a partisan process. And so what I plan to do is withdraw my amendment, but want to work together as we move forward before we get to full committee and see if it's possible to include my language. So I will withdraw my amendment and yield back my time.
I'm so grateful. I really am. I am committed to working with you, Mr. Guthrie, and others as we move forward. I really appreciate the cooperation that we're seeing today. So the gentleman withdraws the amendment.
Thank you.
And Mr. Thank you. And,
This Cardenas, I withdraw my reservation on the point of order. And like you, Madam Chair, I concur. I look forward to working with Congressman Guthrie.
I'm trying to get this thing to.
the other, I saw a hand up from Representative Clark. Did you seek recognition? Representative Clark, are you there? I know that your hand was up. Okay, well, let me ask then if there are any members who do seek recognition to offer an amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute. Are any Anyone else?
Madam Chair, Bilirakis again.
Okay.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Bilirakis, you're recognized.
I appreciate it. This amendment is titled Rex, number 1, RECS, number 1.
Bilirakis and me, probably. Yep.
Madam Chair, I have the amendment.
Okay, and if the clerk would report the amendment.
Cardenas, there's a point of order.
Okay.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to 2668 offered by Mr. Bilirakis of Florida. At the end of the bill, insert the following.
And without objection, the reading of the amendment will be dispensed with. And Mr. Bilirakis, you are now recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate that again. This common sense amendment is straightforward. It would prohibit the FTC from submitting recommendations for legislative action, including regulatory or enforcement action, without an economic analysis by the Bureau of Economics. This amendment brings much needed reform and transparency to the FTC and ensures no unintended consequences arise because of the hasty action that could go forward. So it makes good sense, good fiscal policy. While I will withdraw this legislation, this particular amendment, I want to thank Dr. Bouchon for working on this amendment. And I'm hopeful my friends on the other side of the aisle will consider this as we move forward with reforming the FTC. I want to thank the chair and, of course, the sponsor of the bill. And I will withdraw this amendment at this time.
I thank the gentleman, and once again make it clear that we're going to work on this legislation as we go forward toward the full committee, and yield for I withdraw, I think, to Mr. Cardenas.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, and I withdraw my reservation on point of order. And also, once again, look forward to working with Mr. Bilirakis so I concur with your comments as well, Madam Chair. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I yield back.
Are there any other members who seek recognition to offer an amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute?
Madam Chair, I have an amendment at the desk.
Where are you and who are you? Okay, Mr. Armstrong. There we go. Okay. Mr. Armstrong has a amendment at the desk. Did you identify that? Could you identify that amendment?
Yeah, it's titled the SHIELD Act.
Clerk, do you have that amendment?
Yes, Madam Chair, I do.
And so if the clerk will report that amendment, and Mr. Cardenas, do you have a?
Cardenas reserves a point of order.
Okay.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to 2668 offered by the minority. At the end of the bill, insert the following. Section 3.
Without objection, the reading of the amendment will be dispensed with. And you are recognized, the author is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This amendment would simply add the SHIELD Act to H.R. 2668. I introduced the SHIELD Act earlier this year to clarify that the Commission must prove a violation of law in an enforcement action. The FTC may not base an enforcement action on the Commission's own guidelines. Finally, the SHIELD Act would also allow defendants to offer evidence of compliance with a provision of the law, any Commission guidelines pursuant to that law. A few concerns about the SHIELD Act would be that there's a claim that the SHIELD Act acts as a safe harbor for defendants. It is not. As I just mentioned, under Section B of the amendment provides that a defendant may offer as evidence any FTC guidance. No federal judge would ever interpret that as a safe harbor, and neither should my colleagues. It simply allows a defendant to submit as evidence of compliance with the law FTC guidance pursuant to that law. Offering evidence does not confer immunity, and it is also worth noting that my colleagues often defend the Chevron and our doctrines. Both of these doctrines call for federal courts to defer to an agency's interpretation. These doctrines suggest that the agency interpretations are valuable in understanding the underlying law. Yet in this context, we sometimes get into a different position. Another issue that often gets brought up, and we're just pre-butting some of these, is that the claim that the SHIELD Act seeks to have it both ways. In other words, that the SHIELD Act prohibits the FTC from using non-compliance with FTC interpretations of law as proof of violation. Yet that it also allows a defendant to offer FTC interpretations as evidence compliance with the law. I just always fundamentally disagree with this characterization. The SHIELD Act simply clarifies that the government has the burden to prove a violation of law, not a violation of an interpretation. We should punish defendants for violations of agency. We should never punish defendants for violations of agency interpretations. Attempts to do so merely create legal uncertainty, increase litigation, and unjust outcomes. So I also will withdraw the amendment, but I think these are important concepts to bring up as we continue to move forward. And I'm heartened to hear that we are willing to work with each other to talk about these things, because I think as we move, they do become very important. And with that, I yield back.
This is Cardenas. I withdraw my reservation on the point of order. Look forward to working with the gentleman, Congressman Armstrong.
I thank the gentleman, and now Representative Clark, you had your hand up earlier, and I wanted to recognize you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I move to strike the last word, and I want to start by thanking Vice Chair Cardenas for his leadership on this extremely crucial issue for all of our constituents. The Consumer Protection and Recovery Act is a critical piece of legislation that will allow countless victims of scams, fraud, past, present, and future, to regain what was taken away from them by nefarious actors who frequently prey on the most vulnerable in our society. This includes older adults, members of immigrant communities, as well as folks who are Black and Latino, Indigenous, who the FTC's own research shows are more likely to be victims of fraud than their white peers. Now, as we continue to grapple with the impacts of COVID-19 pandemic and its economic hardship, particularly on underserved communities and communities of color, it is more important than ever that we protect our vulnerable communities and provide the FTC with the power to bring monetary relief to those who have been defrauded or fallen victim to a scam. Let's be clear. The Supreme Court's recent decision around Section 13B of the FTC Act does not imply that the FTC should function without the ability to bring restitution to victims. Rather, it implies that Congress must act to grant the FTC this authority. Today, we are one step closer to re-equipping the FTC with this essential capability, and I hope that we move swiftly on our subcommittee so that this legislation can soon be signed into law. So, Madam Chair, I want to thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. I want to thank you, and to my colleagues. This is truly a bipartisan issue. When our constituents are duped into these scams, they're not asked whether they're Republican or Democrat. They are simply Americans being defrauded of their hard-working, hard-earned dollars and put into unnecessary distress. We can do something about that today. With that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. And once again, I ask, are there any members who seek recognition to offer an amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute?
Madam Chair, Neil Dunn, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk, do you see that amendment at the desk, Mr. Duns?
What is the name of the amendment?
Central 2.
Madam Chair, I have the amendment.
and the clerk will report the amendment.
Cardenas reserves a point of order. Thank you.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 2668 offered by the minority. Page 4, line 6, strike the closing quotation marks and the final period. Page 4, after line...
Without objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with, and Mr. Dunn is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Acting Chair Slaughter recently announced the creation of a new centralized rulemaking group housed within the FTC Office of the General Counsel. In her press release, she noted, I quote, "The new structure will allow the FTC to take a strategic and harmonized approach to rulemaking across its different authorities and mission areas. With this new group in place, the FTC is poised to strengthen existing rules and undertake new rulemaking to prohibit unfair or deceptive practices and unfair methods of competition, especially given the risk that the Supreme Court substantially curtails the FTC's ability to seek consumer redress under Section 13B. But I am," end quote, "but I am hesitant to support any new rulemaking process that could eliminate the input from the Commission's agencies, bureaus, offices, and commissioners, all who have industry-specific knowledge of the FTC's vast portfolio. Regardless, FTC cited the possibility the Supreme Court struck down their authority to seek monetary relief under 13B as one of their primary reasons for this rulemaking overhaul. However, this bill, if passed, will affirm the Commission's authority to seek restoration or disgorgement, therefore eliminating one of the main arguments for this change. My amendment will eliminate the enforcement of the rules promulgated by this central rulemaking body, which the underlying bill clearly eliminates the need for. Madam Chair, I hope that you and my other colleagues will agree to work with me on this further, and if so, I will withdraw my amendment.
I look forward to working.
I can make that commitment to you right now, Mr. Dunn. Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With that, I withdraw my amendment.
I'm very grateful. Thank you.
Cardenas withdraws his reservation on the point of order. Thank you.
Okay. Once again, are there any members who seek Okay. Are there any members who seek recognition to offer an amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute? Anyone? Okay, so now then we will go to the, if there is no further discussion or amendments, we will proceed to vote on the amendment in the nature of a substitute. So we are voting on the Cardenas.
I ask for a voice vote, Madam Chair.
And first, of course, all those in favor with the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 2668 as amended will signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed will signify by saying no.
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 In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. And the amendment to the amendment, the Ains amendment, is adopted by voice vote. Okay. Okay. So yes, in the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. And the Ains amendment, the amendment to the amendment is adopted. And now, recorded vote, members. Let's see. Okay. So the question now occurs on favorable forwarding HR 2668 as amended to the full committee. All those in favor of forwarding HR 2668 as amended to the full committee will signify by saying yes or aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed will signify by saying no.
Oh,
No.
The opinion of the chair,
Aye.
I'm sorry, there was no call for a vote. Did someone just call for a vote?
No, I think it was background noise, Madam Chair.
Oh, she was just on mute. Okay. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. And the ayes have it. And so it will be submitted to the full committee with a positive vote. Do we see that recommendation? Here.
Where's voice?
Okay. So with that, having accomplished our mission, it may not have always been pretty, but we got this markup done. I am very happy. Without objection, the staff is authorized to make technical and conforming changes to the bill consistent with the action taken by the subcommittee today. Once again, I just want to thank everybody for their cooperation and looking forward to working with all of you. This being quite obviously, I think, my first markup. I learned a lot and hope to do better in the future, but I am very appreciative of all the support. We will meet again. And with that, the subcommittee is adjourned.
Happy
Thank you,
belated
everybody.
birthday.